Have you ever started a new project, completely fired up, convinced that this time, finally, things are going to be different?
Oh, absolutely. We have all been there.
Right, and then you just completely lose steam about a week later. You're looking at your running shoes or, that blank business plan, and that burning fire is just utterly gone.
Yeah, it evaporates. And honestly, it usually feels like a massive character flaw.
Exactly. But what if it's not a lack of character at all? What if it is simply a structural failure?
That is the core argument we are looking at today.
Yeah, so today we are doing a deep dive into this really fascinating collection of notes and transcripts that decode something called the architecture of transformation.
And what makes these materials so unique is that they completely bypass that empty hustle culture advice we always hear.
I mean, they combine practical strategy, behavioral psychology, and even some spiritual metaphysics to prove that lasting change isn't just like an accident. It is a machine you can deliberately build.
It's a fully engineered process.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why we fail so consistently, we have to look at the flawed way we almost always begin.
Right, which is relying entirely on the temporary spark of motivation instead of, building the enduring structure of discipline.
And that is the trap, right? We culturally romanticize motivation so much.
We really do. We treat it as the ultimate requirement for getting anything done. But if we look at the psychological reality outlined in these notes, motivation is fundamentally emotional.
So it's just a feeling.
Exactly. It is a surge of energy, usually triggered by novelty or maybe a sudden desire to escape a painful situation. Your brain releases a quick hit of dopamine, which gives you that temporary feeling of invincibility.
But relying on a dopamine hit is a terrible strategy for long-term execution.
Oh, it's the worst. Because the brain rapidly adapts to novelty, the dopamine fades and the emotion just evaporates.
So if your entire strategy for, say, writing a book or getting in shape is based on feeling excited about it every day,
your progress will inevitably flatline. I mean, motivation is great for initiating awareness. It gets you off the couch, but it is fundamentally unreliable as a long-term fuel source.
the way I think about it, and this analogy just hit me, is that motivation is exactly like the starter motor in a car.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, because when you turn the ignition key, the starter motor's only job is to provide this initial massive jolt of electricity to turn the main engine over.
Just a huge burst of energy.
Exactly. But you can't drive the car down the highway on just the starter motor. It would literally burn out in a mile.
Yeah, you need the main engine to catch and take over.
And in this architectural framework, that main engine is discipline.
What's fascinating here is how behavioral science explains the mechanics of that main engine. Because discipline is often misunderstood as just, trying harder.
Just grinding it out.
Right, but it is actually the process of removing what behavioral psychologists call emotional negotiation.
Emotional negotiation. I love that term.
Think about the cognitive load of deciding every single day whether or not you are going to do the hard thing.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It is essentially a courtroom drama in your own head at 5 in the morning.
That is exactly what it is.
The alarm goes off, and suddenly you're this brilliant defense attorney arguing why you actually need more sleep today or why your muscles need recovery, why you can just do it tomorrow.
It is exhausting, and it is where most people lose the battle. You are expending energy debating with your own emotions rather than just executing the task.
Because consistency is what creates actual results.
Yeah, a person doesn't transform their life or achieve a massive goal because of one extraordinary, highly motivated day.
Right. They transform because of hundreds of completely ordinary, sometimes really boring days where they simply followed the process.
Exactly. Discipline removes that courtroom drama entirely. The decision was made weeks ago. You don't ask how you feel, you just look at the schedule.
And these notes take this concept a step further, moving from the psychological mechanics into the metaphysical implications.
Which is where the deepest shift seems to happen.
Yeah, because when you stop negotiating and start executing daily, it doesn't just change your output. It actually restructures your identity.
This is perhaps the most profound realization in the entire collection. When you repeatedly act with discipline, the behavioral evidence begins to pile up, and it forces a cognitive restructuring.
So you are no longer trying to act like a person who writes every day.
Right. You start asking yourself, can I do this?
And you start declaring, this is who I am. Like you are a writer, you are a runner.
Precisely. It is a massive psychological and spiritual leap. Identity is largely formed by what we consistently do.
So when your actions align daily without needing that emotional push, The new behavior just solidifies into your core identity.
Becomes who you are.
But, relying solely on discipline sounds incredibly demanding if you have to consciously flex that mental muscle every single second of the day.
It would be impossible.
So if we have the starter motor of motivation and we have the main engine of discipline, how do we make sure we don't veer off course or just burn out the engine entirely?
That brings us to the engineering perspective. In these notes building the machine, we need systems and we need a completely different understanding of willpower.
The underlying math of this framework gives us this incredibly clean equation, right? Progress lives in the system created between motivation and discipline.
Exactly. You don't rely on motivation. You use its temporary energy specifically to start building structure.
They apply engineering principles to human behavior, which is just a brilliant lens.
It really is. In physical engineering, systems are designed to create predictable outcomes with minimal friction.
You build a machine with certain tolerances, and it does the exact same thing every time. So how do we actually engineer a human system? Like, what does that look like practically, beyond just saying, I'm going to be disciplined today?
It looks like environmental design. Engineering a human system means manipulating your environment and your routines so that the disciplined choice becomes the path of least resistance.
So going back to that 5 a.m. workout example.
Right. Building the machine means you don't wake up and decide what to wear or where to go or what routine to do. You engineer the environment the night before.
The clothes are laid out next to the bed.
The coffee maker is set to an automatic timer. The workout plan is already open on your phone.
You have engineered a sequence where failing to do the workout actually requires more conscious effort than just following the preset track.
Exactly. You are building tracks for the train so you don't have to steer it through the dirt.
And spiritually speaking, these notes suggest this kind of systemized approach creates a deep internal alignment.
It does. You have your vision, which activates your intention, and you have your discipline, which activates your action.
So when you build a daily system, you are essentially synchronizing your intention and your action.
And when intention and action synchronize over a sustained period through a system, transformation stops being a possibility and becomes a mathematical inevitability.
Wow. But even with the tracks laid down, you still need a steady grip on the wheel. And this is where the notes tackle willpower.
Which is heavily misunderstood.
Oh, completely. Because the way our culture talks about willpower is totally backward. We are constantly bombarded with this loud, aggressive hustle mindset.
Yeah, we are told willpower is about intensity, grinding, pushing yourself to the absolute physical and mental brink.
But that cultural narrative treats willpower like an adrenaline shot.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the architectural framework defines true willpower as the exact opposite. They describe it as the quiet decision to continue when progress feels slow or invisible.
A quiet decision.
Yeah.
That is such a liberating concept. You don't need a whole cinematic montage soundtrack playing in your head.
Exactly. Willpower isn't an emotion at all. Philosophically, the will is the faculty that directs human action.
Right, because emotion is noisy. It fluctuates wildly based on whether you are tired or hungry or stressed out.
But your will is the quiet mechanism that determines whether you actually follow through on your intention regardless of all that noise. It converts intention into physical movement.
So strong willpower isn't about screaming with intensity while lifting weights. It is just a calm, unbroken grip on the steering wheel while the car moves forward.
And from a metaphysical standpoint, the notes describe the will as an expression of the inner spirit. It is an internal directive.
So when you systematize your life and strengthen that quiet resolve, this fascinating shift occurs.
You actually become less reactive to external circumstances. The chaos of the outside world starts to matter less, and your internal clarity becomes the primary navigating force.
Okay, so let's keep our car metaphor going. We have the starter motor turning things over with motivation.
Right.
We have the main engine running on the steady hum of discipline. We have our systems acting as the physical tracks, and we have a quiet, steady grip on the wheel with our willpower.
We have the mechanics in place.
Exactly. So now, what is the actual fuel we are putting in the tank to power this entire journey?
The fuel is energy, and the Knights highlight a really fascinating intersection of physics and neuroscience here. The principle that energy follows attention.
Okay, wait, let's slow down on that phrase for a second because it sounds a bit like a bumper sticker. Energy follows attention.
I know, it sounds a bit out there.
Yeah, like when we talk about this, are we talking about some mystical aura, or is there an actual physical mechanism happening in the body?
It is deeply grounded in physical science, specifically neuroplasticity. The behavioral science angle leans heavily on Hebbian theory, which can be summarized as neurons that fire together, wire together.
Ah, right, I've heard that.
Yeah, so every time you focus your attention on a specific task or even a specific pattern of thought, you are sending electrical impulses down specific neural pathways in your brain.
So literally, where you aim your attention dictates where your biological energy flows.
Exactly. And the brain is highly efficient. When you repeatedly send energy down the same pathways, by consistently focusing your attention on your engineered systems, the brain physically reorganizes itself.
Wait, it changes physically.
Yes, it wraps those frequently used neural pathways in a fatty substance called myelin. And that myelin makes the signals travel faster and much more efficiently.
So you are literally performing structural remodeling on your brain tissue based purely on what you choose to pay attention to.
Over time, the hard thing neurologically becomes the easier thing. Attention literally reshapes human capability.
That bridges the gap perfectly between the physical and the metaphysical, because the spiritual side of these notes mirrors that neuroscience perfectly.
It really does. Metaphysically, they state that intention organizes energy.
Right, if your thoughts are chaotic and reactive, your energy is scattered all over the place.
But when your intention is clear and your attention is focused, your energy becomes highly organized, like a laser instead of a standard light bulb.
Which brings us to the final, and I mean, arguably most challenging piece of this entire architecture. Because organized energy, brilliant systems, and strong engines mean absolutely nothing if you aren't the one actively sitting in the driver's seat.
And that requires absolute radical responsibility.
The notes are uncompromising on this point. Progress requires absolute responsibility. Blaming circumstances does not move the needle, only execution does.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, when life throws a genuinely devastating curveball? I've pushed back on this framework for a second.
Go for it.
It is very easy to read a philosophical transcript in a quiet room and say, take responsibility and stop blaming your circumstances.
Yeah.
But what if someone's circumstances are objectively terrible?
That's a fair point.
What if they're dealing with profound grief or systemic barriers or a sudden massive health crisis? How does radical responsibility apply when your physical autonomy or your whole life is collapsing around you?
This raises an important question, and it is a vital distinction to make if we are going to apply this architecture to real human lives. The framework does not claim that circumstances aren't difficult, painful, or completely unfair.
Right.
Tragedy and systemic friction are realities of the human experience. What the notes are emphasizing is the concept of agency.
Agency meaning your fundamental capacity to act within whatever environment you find yourself in.
Yes, when you blame circumstances, even when those circumstances are genuinely awful and not your fault, you are surrendering your agency.
You're giving up your power.
You are essentially declaring, the outside world is entirely in control of my progress and my state of mind, and the moment you make that declaration, your internal growth halts. You become a passenger in your own life.
So the distinction here is between fault and responsibility. It might not be your fault that a health crisis hit, but it is your responsibility to navigate it.
Precisely. Responsibility in this philosophical context isn't about taking the blame for bad things happening to you. It's about taking ownership of your response to those things.
Okay. Taking responsibility is the exact mechanism that empowers you to navigate terrible circumstances without being destroyed by them.
Because it shifts your focus entirely to the variables you actually have the power to control. You stop being a victim of the narrative and become what the notes call a co-creator.
Spiritually and psychologically, responsibility is the cornerstone of that co-creation. By accepting responsibility for your thoughts, your actions, and where you direct your attention from this moment forward, you reclaim your power.
You acknowledge the terrible circumstances, but you refuse to let them dictate your destination.
Exactly.
That completely reframes the idea of responsibility. It isn't a burden being placed on you. It is a tool being handed to you. It is incredibly empowering.
And that final piece brings the entire architecture together.
It really is a synchronized mechanism. Transformation isn't a lottery ticket. It is a constructed reality. Let's look at the full blueprint one more time. Motivation sparks the journey.
Right, it is that starter motor giving you the initial jolt of dopamine. But discipline structures the path. It is the main engine that keeps you moving by pre-making the hard decisions and removing the exhaustion of emotional negotiation.
And systems sustain that progress. By using environmental design to reduce friction, you create predictable, engineered outcomes in your daily life.
Quiet, steady willpower acts as your steering wheel. It translates your internal intention into physical movement without the need for loud, burnout-inducing hustle.
Focused energy fuels the machine. By directing your attention, you physically reorganize your brain's neural pathways, literally remodeling your capability over time.
And absolute radical responsibility means you're sitting firmly in the driver's seat, taking ownership of your response to the world, and just refusing to surrender your agency to your circumstances.
It's a complete system.
So for you listening, here is the immediate practical takeaway. The next time you feel that sudden, amazing rush of motivation, whether it's to start a new business, learn a language, or just finally get your finances in order, do not just ride that emotional high until it naturally crashes.
Because it will crash.
Use that temporary burst of dopamine, that starter motor, to immediately build a permanent system. Set the alarms, rearrange your environment, block out the calendar.
Engineer the system to remove the emotional negotiation before the excitement even has a chance to fade.
You have to build a machine while you still have the spark to see clearly.
Exactly.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, there was one last thread hidden in these notes that I just can't stop thinking about. It builds on what we discussed earlier, the idea that daily discipline eventually creates a profound identity shift.
The point where the behavior becomes the identity.
Right. You move from wondering if you can do a thing to declaring, this is who I am. But think about the hidden cost of that shift.
What do you mean?
Well, if true discipline eventually changes your identity so deeply that the hard things become automatic, if waking up at 5 a.m. or writing 5 pages a day literally becomes part of the fabric of who you are, what happens to the old version of you?
Oh, wow. That ventures into a very deep philosophical space.
Right. Is true transformation actually a process of creative destruction? Does the old version of you, the person who relied on motivation, who constantly negotiated with their emotions, who let circumstances dictate their progress, does that identity have to completely die before the new you can fully take the wheel?
Tearing down the old house.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, do we fail to reach our biggest goals not because we lack discipline or systems or willpower, but because we are secretly terrified of letting our old, comfortable identity pass away?
That is a phenomenal question to leave on. It implies that building this new architecture fundamentally requires tearing down the old house first. You simply can't occupy both.
Something heavy and hopefully inspiring to mull over the next time you're negotiating with your alarm clock at 5 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of change. Keep building those systems, keep holding on to your agency, and as always, keep exploring.